The twin suns of Heir ablaze above the citadel, casting molten gold across its soaring spires and polished white stone. Beneath the celestial canopy, thousands of armored figures stood motionless in the courtyard, their bodies gleaming like a sea of metal. At the center of this silence, Queen Saravira stood alone, an embodiment of grace and power in her ornate armor, her sapphire skin glowing faintly beneath her gilded regalia. In her arms, wrapped in pristine ivory cloth, was a source of the Empire's greatest unease, her newborn child. The baby screamed. It had been 10 days since the birth. 10 days of uninterrupted, piercing cries that no physician, mystic, or neural empath could explain. The infant, healthy by every measure, wailed as though mourning a world it had only just entered. The Queen had summoned her entire council, exhausted every scientific and psychic avenue, and even offered gifts to the forgotten gods of Zeara's ancient temples. Nothing calmed the child, not warmth, not silence, not song. The people whispered behind her back now. Some called it an omen, others a curse. A few, treasonous in thought, called it a sign of the Queen's failing bloodline. Saravira, though ever composed in the public eye, had not slept in days. Her voice had faded from command to whisper. The cries echoed not only through her holes, but through the hollowed-out corridors of her chest, where the chill of helplessness had begun to spread. She was ruler of 12 systems, breaker of rebellions, architect of galactic peace, and yet she could not soothe her own child. The latest delegation had arrived from Earth that morning, an inconsequential diplomatic exercise, she had thought, a show of unity between the younger human race and the dominion of Heir. Now, she found herself in the audience chamber, presenting her child out of obligation rather than hope, her voice void of ceremony as she greeted the human emissaries. Among them was a soldier. She had barely noticed him at first, tall, sun-darkened, with a kind of quiet bearing that suggested he'd seen more than he spoke of. No medals adorned his modest uniform, only the scuffed edge of a service pin, half hidden beneath his collar. Captain Elias Rourke, his name had been. She remembered it only because the moment he stepped into the room, her child's scream faltered. Not stopped, merely paused. A blink of silence in the storm. Saravira had not moved, nor had she spoken, but the silence stretched and then cracked as the child resumed its sorrow. Still, the Queen's eyes had narrowed slightly, and her voice cut the air like ice. You stepped forward. Elias hesitated. Diplomats glanced nervously at one another, unsure whether to intervene or flee. But the soldier obeyed, moving with a steady grace, his boots soft on the polished obsidian floor. As he approached, the child's cries diminished again, now a whimper, uncertain. Elias stopped an arm's length from the Queen, unsure of what to say in the face of such divine stillness. Saravira stared at him, her gaze 1,000 winters deep, and for the first time he saw the weariness behind her eyes. Not weakness, never that, but the desperate weight of a mother's solitude. Why does she respond to you? Saravira asked. I don't know, he said truthfully. The baby shifted in her arms, tiny fingers twitching. Its breath hitched. Then, without warning, a soft sigh replaced a cry. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Elias's heart thudded once, then twice, as if something unseen had just passed through him. He could feel the child's gaze, though its eyes were still mostly closed. A trembling curiosity in the air, like dust stirred in a still room. Take her, Saravira whispered. The humans behind him began to protest, but Elias stepped forward instinctively, arms rising in deference. Saravira handed the child over with the careful reverence of someone passing a crown, her fingers brushing briefly against his. The child settled against Elias's chest like a puzzle piece falling into place. No cry, no whimper, just silence, and then, impossibly, a small coo, the kind that precedes a laugh but doesn't quite reach it. A tremor passed through the assembly, not of fear, but something older, awe. Saravira stood unmoving, her hands now empty, her face unreadable. But something had cracked beneath her skin. Elias saw it, a fissure where the mask of divinity had been. And he understood, in that moment, that what he held was not merely a child, but the keystone of an empire trembling on the edge of change. He gently rocked the baby, humming a tune without realizing. An old lullaby from Earth, handed down in fragments, barely remembered. The Queen listened. Everyone listened. Something was shifting, and whatever it was, it had only just begun. Captain Elias Rourke stood in the royal nursery, his boots planted on silken carpets woven with star maps of forgotten constellations. The infant nestled in his arms had finally drifted into peaceful sleep, her alien skin a soft blue like her mother's, her pulse steady beneath the blanket. The room pulsed faintly with ambient light that responded to mood, and it now bathed them both in a tranquil amber glow. Around him, the Queen's attendants lingered in stunned silence, as though afraid the child might awaken if they so much as breathed too loudly. He didn't know why it worked. He only knew that it did. Saravira watched him from a distance, her arms crossed not in defiance, but in quiet calculation. She was still robed in ceremonial armor, but her crown had been set aside, replaced by a simple braid down her back, as though the weight of royalty had momentarily slipped from her brow. She was impossibly still, a sculpted vision of restrained emotion, but Elias had seen enough grief to recognize it when it tried to wear the mask of control. "You should not be able to do this," she said, her voice low and sharp. "I agree," Elias replied. He didn't look at her. His attention remained fixed on the baby. She stepped closer, the rustle of fabric against gilded metal barely audible. Zayari children are bonded psychically to their mothers at birth. Even in surrogacy, the link is immutable. No outsider has ever. Her voice faltered, and Elias looked up. "It's not about blood," he said gently. "Sometimes it's about presence, warmth, familiarity." Saravira narrowed her eyes. "You imply I'm unfamiliar to my own daughter." "I'm implying she may not feel what you think you're giving," he answered, his voice measured. "And I don't think it's your fault." A quiet descended. No one else dared speak. Even the nursery's gentle hum had diminished. "She cries," Saravira said at last, "because I am cold." The admission was as fragile as glass, yet heavier than stone. Elias felt it hang between them, unspoken for too long. The Queen of Zayara, vanquisher of rebellions, unifier of the twin moons, confessing to an emotion she'd been taught to suppress. Maybe, Elias said, after a moment, or maybe she just needed someone who wasn't afraid to listen before trying to fix her. The Queen regarded him with unreadable intensity. She looked not like a ruler in that moment, but like a mother, terrified of failing at something no title could prepare her for. "What is that song?" she asked, motioning toward the child, who now clutched at Elias's jacket with one tiny hand. "An earth lullaby," he said. "My mother used to hum it when we had nowhere safe to sleep. I barely remember the words, but the melody stuck." "She died?" "She did, during the Sidon skirmish. I was 9. Saravira's expression didn't change, but her silence carried weight. She gestured toward the cradle in the center of the room. Elias hesitated, then lowered the child gently onto the cushioned bed. The moment his hands left her, the baby stirred, but did not cry. Instead, she turned toward the sound of his breathing, small mouth forming a soundless murmur. "She's still attuned to you," Saravira said. "This is not a trick." "You thought it might be." "My council did. Humans are not trusted easily in our courts, no matter what treaties have been signed." "I'm not here to manipulate anyone," Elias said. "I didn't even want to come." "Then why did you?" He considered for a moment. "Because they told me to. And because sometimes, when you're tired of battles, you go where you think there'll be fewer." Her gaze didn't waver. "You were wrong. I figured that out about 5 minutes after I landed." A rare flicker passed across her face. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of something softer. Elias noticed how the child, even while sleeping, seemed more still in his presence. It wasn't magic. It wasn't fate. It was something deeply human, a recognition of calm in the middle of chaos. "I need to ask something of you," the Queen said suddenly. Elias tensed. "Go ahead." "My daughter's name is Ayara. She was born under the third eclipse, when the sky split into 5 halos. The old prophesies claimed such children carry both blessing and burden. The crying, it has stirred fear in my court. Superstition spreads fast." "I've seen it happen," he said. "I need her protected. Not from outsiders, but from those within. There are factions who see her as a threat, a disruption to the bloodline. And now, they will see you as something worse." He understood the weight of her words. It wasn't a request for help. It was a warning disguised as trust. "What are you asking me to do?" "For now, remain," she said. "Stay in the palace. Be near her. She needs peace. And I need time to understand what this means." Elias hesitated, then nodded. "I'll stay." "Good," she said, already turning. "Your quarters will be reassigned. You'll be granted access to the nursery at all hours, and I will speak with the council on your behalf." She paused at the doorway, her silhouette bathed in a pale shaft of starlight. "Captain Rourke," she added, without looking back, "do not mistake her silence for safety. The real danger hasn't begun yet." Elias watched her disappear into the corridor beyond, and then turned back to the sleeping child. Her tiny chest rose and fell, a rhythm of fragile peace. Whatever had just begun, he was no longer a visitor to it. He was inside it now, heart, mind, and consequence. Word of the child's silence spread like a spark in dry fields. By the second sunrise, corridors once hushed with fear thrummed with voices, some reverent, others alarmed. In the high towers of the citadel, nobles whispered of human witchcraft, and in the shadowed halls below, generals debated the risk of allowing a foreign soldier such intimate proximity to the heir. The queen said nothing publicly, but within the nursery, her presence was no longer that of a distant sovereign. She watched, she listened, and she stayed longer with her daughter than anyone could remember her staying with anyone. Elias had expected to feel like a guest. Instead, he became a fixture, an oddity that refused to leave and could no longer be removed without consequence. Ayara still responded most to him. She rarely cried now, and when she did, his voice calmed her within moments. The bond was undeniable, but it wasn't power he held. It was something older, quieter, trust. One evening, as twin moons drifted high above the crystalline skylight, Saravira stood by the window in silence while Elias rocked the child in a chair made of living wood. Outside, the courtyard shimmered with the reflections of the starlit canopy, and inside, the only sound was a low hum of a lullaby. No words, just breath and melody. "You seem tired," Saravira said, eyes still fixed on the stars. "I've been tired since I was 16, Elias replied. "It just doesn't show as much now." She turned, face unreadable. "You're not what I expected from a soldier." "You expected sharp edges." "I expected someone shaped by orders, not empathy." He paused, shifting Ayara slightly in his arms. "Orders only carry you so far. After that, you have to decide who you want to be when no one's watching." She studied him, then walked toward a low table and set down a crystal sphere. Inside it, swirling mist revealed the faint shape of a coiled serpent with wings. An ancient Zayari device, part archive, part prophecy. "Before she was born," Saravira said, "I consulted the oracles, not out of belief, out of curiosity. They spoke of a child who would bring change. Not peace or war, just change. The kind that breaks things before remaking them." Elias raised an eyebrow. "And you think Ayara is that child?" "She hasn't cried since she met you," Saravira said. "That's not coincidence. It's catalyst." He didn't respond at once. The weight of what she implied settled slowly, like dust on forgotten glass. "I'm not a prophet. I'm not special." "Then why her?" she asked, voice lower now. "Why not my hands? My voice? My blood?" Elias met her gaze. "Because maybe you've never let anyone teach you how to love gently. You were taught to lead, to conquer, not to cradle." Saravira stiffened, but she didn't deny it. She moved toward the cradle and looked down at her daughter's sleeping form. Her hand hovered near Yara's tiny head, trembling faintly before it withdrew. "There are those who think I should name another heir," she murmured. "Say the child is touched by madness, that you've infected her with human interference." "Would you?" "No," she said, "but I fear someone else might try to do it for me." Elias nodded slowly. I felt the tension. Eyes in the corridors. Disapproval thick enough to chew. A faction of the High Circle is already drafting a petition. They fear bloodline dilution, Earth's influence, my emotional compromise. So they'll act. Eventually, quietly, with elegance and finality. The silence in the nursery deepened. Elias looked down at the baby, who stirred slightly, then settled again with a sigh. He knew what Saravira wasn't saying, that he, too, had become a liability, that his presence, however comforting to the child, posed a threat to the ancient order of her empire. But still, she had not removed him. That night, a shadow crept in the form of a trusted servant, a man whose name Elias didn't know but whose footsteps should not have reached the inner chamber. The soft hiss of a hidden blade gave him away. Elias moved without hesitation, shielding the Yara with his body, knocking the assailant backward into a column. The scuffle was brief, brutal. The man's arm was broken. His vow of loyalty shattered as easily as the bone beneath Elias's boot. Guards arrived seconds later. Saravira emerged from her chambers in a robe of midnight silk, her expression carved from stone. She did not ask what had happened. She simply looked at Elias, at Yara's wide, startled eyes, and then at the man writhing on the floor. "Execute him," she said. "No trial." Elias asked. There was no doubt. Her voice cracked like ice underfoot. Elias held the child close, her face pressed against his chest. "Then you'd better prepare for more." "I am," Saravira replied, "and I need you to be ready too." "For what?" "For what happens when prophecy stops being vague and starts becoming visible." She stepped forward, brushing her fingers over her daughter's head, gently, deliberately this time. The baby looked up at her, and for the first time, didn't turn away. That was a moment Elias knew something fundamental had shifted, not just in the Queen, but in the Empire itself.